We want to talk a little bit in this video about the creation of the modern state of Israel, where that comes from. Obviously, our nation still today has very strong ties with that Middle Eastern country. We want to see where those come from and really how those are affected in the post-war period, and then what effect that has on how we live our lives today. Uh, this grows out of the uncertainty following World War II. Right? Obviously, when you think about the modern state of Israel, it is a Jewish state. It had been the homeland of the Jews in the years before and leading up to the time of Jesus. But we'll talk about what ends up happening there to get those people away from the land. But after World War II, there are a group of people called Zionists who want to travel back to this ancient homeland to establish a country where these people could be together, could be defended, and keep something like the Holocaust from happening again. So it's where a lot of this stuff is going to grow from. This today is the modern state of Israel. As you can see, it's got Egypt there to its left. That big body of water is the Mediterranean Sea. The country of Jordan is on its right. And so Israel's a very narrow, kind of thin country. You can see it's in two colors. The Gaza Strip and what's called the West Bank are Palestinian areas in Israel. And we're going to talk about why there are two groups of people that are there and how those things have influenced kind of what's going on here in the United States. Cool thing is, I got two things. One, I actually got to visit Israel several years ago as part of a trip I took with some people from the First Christian Church here in town. And I also, as a freshman, made the horrible mistake of taking a class called Arab-Israeli Conflict because it sounded interesting. And so I got to dig a little bit into the history of the region during that class. But let's take a look. The picture on the left and the picture on the right are both pictures of Israel. What had kind of happened with the trip is that I was, my wife and I had gone to this informational meeting. This was one that was definitely on the travel bucket list, getting to go see where the events of the Bible actually happened. But as we sat through the meeting, my wife's got a very sensitive stomach, and so one of the things that we worried about was would she be able to eat the food? How would she kind of deal with that? Also, Noah was a really young kid, and so didn't know if we necessarily wanted to leave him for that long. So as we left, kind of the church that evening, we said, "Well, hey, that'd be great, but we're not going to do it." My parents, though, had gone to the meeting and were going to go. And so they called up and made an offer that if I would go, they would pay for the trip, which was awesome. And my wife was amazing enough to say, "You're not turning down a free trip. You go. I'll stay with Noah. And you can tell me about it when you get back." So I think the reason that she did that was because she had in her head, this is kind of the same idea I had in my head, that Israel was going to look a lot like that picture on the left. And that is Israel. That cave that you see there in the middle is actually where they found some of the first Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of these really old writings of kind of the earliest known writings of the books of the Bible. What we didn't realize was that the picture on the right was also Israel. The place we stayed for the first 3 days, this was the view out my door. That's the Sea of Galilee. And yeah, it kind of looks like a tropical island. So when I was sending pictures home, I sent a whole lot of pictures home like the one on the left. Didn't show her the pictures on the right until I was actually back in good old Indiana. But the Sea of Galilee, cool place where Jesus walked on water, where the disciples fished. And it was neat to be able to be in some of those places. The roots of this Arab-Israeli conflict, though, go back way into history to a man named Abraham. Abraham has the distinction of having a great connection to three of the world's major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham has an interesting story. He's called to leave his homeland by God and to go to a place that God will show him. And so he's told he's going to be the father of a great nation. God takes him out, shows him all the stars in the sky, and says, "Your descendants will be more numerous than all of the stars that you can see." Well, the problem is Abraham and his wife, a lady named Sarah, uh, couldn't have children. Sarah wasn't able to bear children. So Abraham gets a little impatient, which is never a good idea. But he gets a little impatient. And so basically, his wife comes to him and says, "Look, I'm not having a kid. We want to have children. Take my maidservant, a woman named Hagar. I'm assuming she was a little more attractive than that name would suggest. And have a kid with her." Yeah, she actually said that. Now, I've got some questions there. Like, that's not happening, I think, in 2021. And if it does, there are going to be issues. Now, there are going to be issues that follow this, obviously. But how long does Abraham have to wait before he says, okay? I've got questions. Those are things I would like to ask in heaven. But Abraham sleeps with Hagar, and she bears him a son, and his name is Ishmael. Now, if you are a Muslim, you believe that God's promise to Abraham uh, comes down through Ishmael, right? That's the son who will make him the father of a great nation. Um, when Ishmael's born, though, Sarah gets really jealous. Who could have seen that coming? And she basically comes and tells Abraham, "You got to get these folks out of here. I can't take it anymore." And so he sends Hagar and Ishmael away. God does promise Ishmael that he will make him the father of a nation as well. And so, like I said, if you are a Muslim, you trace your lineage back to Abraham through Ishmael. From the Jewish or Christian perspective, what happens next is where you trace your heritage back. His wife Sarah is like 90 years old and she becomes pregnant. People lived a lot longer back then. It probably wasn't as weird as it sounds. And she has a son named Isaac. And so, if you're Jewish or Christian, you believe that God's promise to Abraham was fulfilled through his son Isaac. Now, you can tell from the painting there that there are some different kind of things that are going on. When Isaac is young, or if you read the Quran, Ishmael, but coming to it from my Christian perspective, it's Isaac. So if you look in the Old Testament of the Bible, and you look in the book of Genesis, you can see the story of Abraham and Isaac. And God basically tells Abraham, "I want you to sacrifice Isaac. I want you to go up this place I'm going to show you, this mountaintop, and I want you to sacrifice it." Right? It's a test of faith and obedience. And so, sure enough, Abraham and Isaac set off. I think it's kind of a little bit sketchy, but Abraham makes Isaac carry the wood up. Now Isaac doesn't realize what's going to happen to him until Dad starts to tie him up after they've built this altar, and Abraham's getting ready to sacrifice. Just as he raises the knife, an angel shows up, like you see in the painting. Says, "Hey, stop! We don't want you to do this." If you look in the very back of the painting, there's a ram there that's caught, and they end up sacrificing the ram. And God knows that Abraham is obedient. Well, I'm wondering then, right? Like I wonder a lot about this kind of stuff. If that night, how, if you're Isaac, how do you go to sleep? Right? Your dad's tied you up, had the knife over top of you, was ready to kill you. Are you sleeping with one eye open? And I guarantee you that the first thing Isaac did when he got back to camp was to tell Sarah what had gone on, because Noah can never wait to tell Mandy anything that I have done wrong. So I'm sure as a son, that was um, that was big on the priority list. But anyway, Abraham thus becomes connected to all of these people, and so any place Abraham was becomes really important. So you got three religions that have a little bit in common, but probably feel like they have more not in common. And so what they're going to end up doing is competing over these sites that are there in Israel. This is one of them. That's me on the right. That's my dad Mike, my mom Bev. there on the left. Neither of them are taller than I am. They're both standing on a rock. I'm actually the tallest person in my family. Um, my mom's actually a little taller than my dad, so dad just like got this really great spot to have this picture taken. But one of the places we visited was this. This was the entrance to um, the land that would become Israel. History has it that Abraham walked through this door 4,000 years before this picture was taken. So you look at something that is just that old, and it was neat to be able to go and to see that. Um, One of the places they compete over is the city of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, all the way back to the time of folks like King David, has a huge part to play in the history of the Jewish people. So probably the thing that's sticking out there to you is the golden dome at the top of that, and that is a mosque called the Dome of the Rock. Now, the Dome of the Rock, I actually got to go up onto um, what they call the Temple Mount, uh, but it's where the Dome of the Rock is. You couldn't go in; you had to be a Muslim to go into the Dome of the Rock. But it's very beautiful on the outside. It's supposed to be really pretty on the inside. And in the middle of the rock is supposed to be the place where Abraham was sacrificing Ishmael. So again, back that Abraham connection, really important. Uh, this was not always there, though. This was actually the site of the Jewish temple, which was the holiest site in all of Judaism, um, which used to be on that mount. So both of those groups really want, and I mean, it wasn't very big, but they really want this thing about the size of two football fields, some of the most competed over real estate in the entire world is going to be there. If you look around the outside of the walls, this is also one of the most exclusive places in the world to be buried. Christian tradition holds that kind of where I'm taking this picture is where the second coming of Christ will happen. And so the idea was that the closer you were to that, the quicker you were going to be resurrected as a Christian believer. And so this is kind of buying a grave there is kind of buying your front row seat to the resurrection. If you go around to the left around the corner of the city, it's actually where Oscar Schindler is buried from Schindler's List fame is there as well. Now you look at this picture here, and going up on the Temple Mount, we were told that morning it was a very holy place, and so you had to dress appropriately. We were told it was semi-warm outside, so we were told we could wear hiking shorts, and so you can look and see there underneath my makeshift skirt that I've got on shorts that come to my knees. Well, my friend Chris and I, he was my roommate on the trip, um, are bringing up the rear. The guy that was leading the trip asked us to make sure everybody got through security. As we were walking to catch up with our group, some guys with machine guns, no kidding, come and tell us we have to come with them. Now, I'm always in the habit of doing what guys with machine guns tell me I have to do. And so as we follow them, we're kind of talking to each other and wondering, are we going to get out of this or not? I look over to my right, and wandering away is a large group of, the group of 50 so people we were with, including my mom and dad, who have no idea that men with machine guns have basically kidnapped me. We come down to the end of this long corridor. There's a guy sitting in a lawn chair with a machine gun across his lap. He flips back this tarp and says, "You have to buy one of these and wrap it around yourself if you want to be up here." And so basically, it was a scam. They wanted $20. We got the two wonderful skirts that you see here, and somehow we look more holy this way, kind of semi-drag dress, than we would have the other way. We wander back, to which my mom kind of looks at me and is like, "Why are you wearing that?" I tell her that she didn't pay attention to me being kidnapped by guys with machine guns, and so, I was a little salty about that still. But good news is one of the ladies on our trip really liked my skirt and asked if she could use it for a table at her house. So I gave it to her. And so, maybe somewhere in Scott County, that's still on somebody's table. It's been a long time, but maybe it is. Uh, The Jewish temple, like I said, doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down. But this is why the Jews find it so holy. You may have heard of King David, right? The guy with the slingshot that knocked down Goliath. Well, his son Solomon is supposed to be the wisest man who ever lived, and God told Solomon he could build him a temple. A lot of the Jewish religion is based on animal sacrifice. And so the idea was that this is where people would come and have animals sacrificed to atone for their sins. And so the first temple is called the Temple of Solomon. And it's supposed to be extremely ornate and beautiful. And it was the center of Jewish life. Um, the Jews kind of, if you read the Old Testament of the Bible, go through kind of the same kind of spell, though. They're really loyal to God. God blesses them. Generations forget, they step out of line, they're conquered by people, the Babylonians or whoever, and then they're taken into captivity. And so the temple is burned and rebuilt. But by the time of Jesus, the Romans are in charge of the Holy Land. And so the Jewish temple is still in operation, but everything is run through Roman governors who are in charge of what's happening. Now, this is the part, obviously, that I was fascinated by, right? Those steps that you see there on the left were steps where rabbis would come, their disciples would sit there, and the rabbis would teach. Those are steps up to the old city of Jerusalem, sitting in a place where maybe Peter or John or James was sitting and listening to Jesus was just enough to give me goosebumps. If you look at the picture on the top right, that is the city of Bethlehem. We didn't get to go to Bethlehem. It was under the control of a different group, but that was kind of our view of that. And then the picture at the bottom is my mom, and I'm not sure she's supposed to be touching this tree, but it is a 2,000-year-old olive tree that was growing in the Garden of Gethsemane. So yes, that tree was there when Jesus was there. Again, just kind of every time you turned around in this place, there was something that was just kind of blowing your mind. But like I said, not really sure my mom was supposed to be touching it, but it had lasted 2,000 years, so I didn't figure she was going to hurt it too badly. What ends up happening is the Jews, um, after the time of Jesus, right? So the crucifixion, resurrection happened, historically say, 33, 33 AD to 40 AD, depending on um, when you date the birth of Christ. After the ascension, you've got maybe another 30 or 40 years where the Romans are in charge of Israel, but the Jewish people are doing things to try and throw them over, right? They want to kick the Romans out. And so the Romans finally have enough of it and say, look, we're done with you people. We're going to destroy your temple. And so they destroy it, they burn it down. Not one stone is left on top of another one. A lot of it because the gold in the temple melted and went in between the cracks in the stone. And so to get all that gold, they took every stone off of every other one. The only thing that's left is the retaining wall, this outside wall of the Temple Mount. And this is what is called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. And what people would do, there's a men's section that you see there, there's a women's section on the other side, where people would come and they would write their prayers down and they put their prayers into these cracks in the wall. And so this was as close as you could get to the holiest site in Judaism to be able to kind of do this. And so what ends up happening is the Romans say, okay, we're going to take all the Jews and we're kicking you out. And it's called the Diaspora. And so we're going to send all of these Jews out. And if you look, this was the stuff in purple and blue was the Roman Empire. And so they're going to send them basically away from Israel. You don't get to live here anymore. You're going to go other places. And so what that does is it makes the Jews a people without a country. Or if you go do something stupid in another country in the world, say you go on spring break and you do something dumb, the United States is going to have your back. As a citizen of the United States, they'll fight for you. But if you don't have a country like that, then you wind up in a situation where you're being persecuted. And really from the time of the temple destruction up until 1946, that's what's happened to the Jews. They're just horrible things that happen to these people, but they're spread out in all these different places. And so that's why in Hungary and Poland and Germany and Austria, there are pockets of Jews who are easy targets for guys like Hitler. that become in charge. Well, in 1917, as the Ottoman Empire collapses at the end of World War One, a guy in the British government, a Lord Balfour, actually writes a paper where he says, "I think the Jews need a homeland in Israel." And so after World War II, the Jews look and say, "Hey, that's a great idea." The problem is there are a group of people called the Palestinians, right, who are living in Israel. And so as these folks move back, um, and then ultimately create their own nation. It's a nation where you've got these Jewish people who are in charge of the country, but you've also got these Palestinian people who have lived there for hundreds of years, who feel like now they're second class citizens. As soon as Israel declares itself a modern nation, I think it's 1948 that happens, they're attacked by their Muslim neighbors. They're able to repel them, and for a series of wars in the 60s and 70s, they do the same thing. Um, Israel's got a really, really good military. Part of it is um, you have to serve, both men and women. You have to serve in the military in your early 20s. It's late teens, early 20s. It's a requirement, and so everybody is kind of versed in those sorts of things. But in 1968, I believe there is a very short war where Egypt and some other countries tried to attack. And what ends up happening is Israel not only repels the attack, but they end up taking additional territory, which are those two things we saw in orange on that map there at the beginning. They take over the city of Jerusalem. These are Israeli soldiers at the Wailing Wall. Really, for the first time, their people are going to control this area of land in 2,000 years. So you can see the emotion on those guys' faces as they come in. What ends up happening is that the United States will recognize the modern state of Israel. Um, we obviously have a large Jewish population here. We've got a lot of Christians in the country who look at this and say, hey, these are God's people. We need to be aligned with them. But what that's done is it's made things really awkward with the Muslim nations around them that don't like them very much. In the 1970s, we have an oil crisis because of our support of Israel. Basically, those Middle Eastern countries say, well, we're not going to trade oil with you. We're going to make oil really expensive. And so this has been something that's this alliance has gotten us, um, kind of um, in some difficult situations too. Um, but our alliance with Israel is one of our strongest around the world. And so this is looking back. This is where I took the picture that you saw of the Dome of the Rock. This is the Church of All Nations, and it's one that's there on the Mount of Olives. And so it's a difficult spot in the world. Every U.S. president that serves 2 terms, usually by the last 2 years of their last term, are trying to create peace in Israel um, with kind of their immediate neighbors. Um, Jimmy Carter negotiates a peace between Egypt and Israel in the 70s. It was a big deal, but you hear a lot about that today. This is the flag of the nation of Israel. You see the Star of David there in the middle. That was the symbol, remember, in yellow that Hitler's making these people wear. But now they've turned it into a symbol of pride. The motto of the state of Israel is never again. And so that is, we're going to be on guard for these types of efforts to happen. But there's a little background why the United States cares and a little background on the modern state of Israel.